So I started playing OOTP back in version 6, which should tell you two things. First of all, my knees creak whenever I walk. And secondly, I've messed up some save games from poor settings choices. So as you're starting a new OOTP 23 save, I want to make sure that you get set up and won't have to restart your league in 3 years because everything's gone haywire. So I'm going to go over the essential settings for you to have a successful save game. So I'm going to start a standard game in this case. I think a lot of these settings and tweaks could help in fictional or historical saves. I just don't generally play those modes, so I can't speak as authoritatively to those. So this is really going to be geared towards a modern MLB standard start. So first of all, with challenge mode is great if you want to earn perfect team rewards, or if you can't help but make changes in commissioner mode that feel like cheating. So if you don't have that self-control, I recommend enabling it. Otherwise, I like having ultimate flexibility to make any sort of settings changes, and challenge mode restricts some of those, as well as it just gives you, I think, a lot more options in case you need to actually hop in to fix a bug or something in commissioner mode. So I'm going to set that to no. Then as far as leagues to select, you could enable all of them and it won't cause any harm. The only issue is that it will slow down your game. And I personally didn't see too much benefit whenever I played with some of the European leagues and some of the other lesser known baseball leagues. If you're going to start in them, great. Otherwise, I really recommend keeping it to about 5, just to keep the sim speed up while also giving you the highest quality of players available, as generally the standard of competition in a lot of these leagues is lesser than even like US independent leagues. So the 5 leagues that I always enable are MLB, the U.S. independent leagues. That gives you quite a few options to find additional young prospects on occasion that you can purchase for cash. Makes it a lot more fun that way. The Mexican League is one of the higher quality leagues as well, especially common with players who are maybe a little bit past their prime, trying to get another shot in MLB. Additionally, Korean Baseball Organization and the Japanese League. So with those, that should cover really about 99% of the players that you'd want to see. Some of the other leagues have interesting players that develop, but generally to a lesser extent. And for example, with the Cuban League, you're not going to see posted players or free agents or players like that coming and going at this point with the default settings. So I generally don't enable that. So now this is going to start building the rest of the league. But one of the things that you'll see here is there's probably 1,000+ settings that you can tweak or enable or disable within the game, and it's certainly fun to explore that, but it can definitely be daunting and overwhelming if you're new to the game or you just don't have hours and hours to pour through setting screens. So these are the ones that I find make the largest difference, and I would try to do a comprehensive list earlier, and it ended up being over an hour long as far as settings changes that I'll make, just explaining those. So really this is the cream of the crop there. We'll really be looking at a lot of the common, I think most questioned, and some of the settings that fix issues ahead of time. So things like player ratings, a little bit with AI, as well as the personality ratings, things like that. Just really like small quality of life changes that if you're going to play, especially 10 or more seasons in a save, really start adding up. So once this finishes building, which I hope this is the last progress bar, then I will start diving into those. Oh, just one more. All right. So after this, yes, now we go into selecting your team, just for the sake of this video, I'm going to pick the Rangers, my hometown team. And the other setting that will really determine how you want to play is the role. So the default is GM and manager, and I think that's what most people are going to want to play. But just to explain the difference, so manager, you'll have the ability to manage in game. You'll get to pick your starter, pick your lineup, but you won't get to pick your roster. You're at the mercy of your GM in that case, which is the AI, which is not always a good experience to be at the mercy of the AI's roster management. So if you really want to limit the scope of how you play and you really just want to play games out, that's the best way. More people are going to be interested in general manager mode, which is the inverse. So you get to control the roster, you get to sign free agents, make trades, but you don't get to actually make any settings. You don't get to play, you don't get to set lineups, you don't get to make any of the rotation decisions. You're at the mercy of your manager for that. And once again, being at the mercy of AI is not that enjoyable. So most people will play GM and manager, which is, I think, just what everybody hopes, which is you get to do everything, which can certainly be a lot of work, but if you go into all the nitty-gritty details, but I think it's the most rewarding form of save. So I'm going to enable that here, and we'll start the game. So once you're in here, you can now start playing. In this case, it puts you in the middle of a spring training without the actual games the first season. But we're going to go and make a few more settings tweaks. So if you go to the game drop-down, game settings, you'll get to, first of all, this global settings tab. The biggest one that a lot of people struggle with at first is the rating scales. So what I'd suggest is if you're brand new to the game, but you have experience with playing a lot of the EA sports games like Madden or FIFA, 1 to 100 will seem very familiar. And it also matches perfect teams. So if you're trying to get a baseline of what numbers are good and how all the different ratings interact, specifically for the multiplayer mode, I think that's a great way to do it. To me, it's just a little too easy, and it's just you get into a lot of analysis of, well, this guy is a 75 contact hitter, but I can sign a 78. Is that worth it? And really, that just ends up splitting too many hairs. For most settings, most saves, I'd recommend going 20 to 80. That is a way of displaying. And I should also mention, by default, it's 20 to 80 in increments of 5. So the lowest rating you'll see is 20, then 25, 30, 35, etc. And this is the way that most players are graded and scouted in real life. If you check out any of the prospect rankings from ESPN, The Athletic, Fangraphs, anything like that, you'll see it's all based off a 20 to 80 scale, where 50 is a major league average at whatever that skill set is. 80 is a generational player like Juan Soto's plate discipline, or Mark McGwire power, that sort of thing. And 20 is somebody who isn't even major league level at that point, like Albert Pujols sprint speed, just very very bottom of the whatever measurement you're taking. So I recommend that if you want a little bit more mystery. 2 to 8 is basically the same principle, but just less granularity. And then for overall rating, star rating will seem very familiar if you play games like Football Manager, but once again, I recommend values of 20 to 80, and in this case, it actually specifies that's increments of 5. I don't know why the other option will show numbers in between, but they do have that option. But I recommend increments of 5, and not showing ratings greater than the max. That gets a little bit too revealing, especially, and it defeats the whole purpose of the 20 to 80 rating scale. Then finally, on the player ratings, I like to disable this displayed relative to. this is something that's probably very helpful in smaller leagues, like if you're playing as a minor league manager or in a European league. But in general, at Major League Baseball level, you know, this option usually causes more issues than it solves. There's a long history of forum posts and Reddit posts that talk about bugs with scouting, and most of the time it comes down to this setting. So by default, I disable this and just go with it because it saves you a lot more pain and suffering down the road. And then for that's actually it for the global settings as far as the big ones. Under players and face gen, like I said, you can see a lot of the depth, but the biggest ones that I find are player personality ratings on the profile page. So this will tell you whether someone's a captain or whether they have high work ethic or low intelligence. You get that information right on the profile page without having to set up a separate view or do anything too out of the ordinary. It's really just a quality of life boost that makes your life easier, especially when it comes to trade deadline and the draft especially. So the biggest one though on this screen is the player development settings. So long story short, OOTP will give you a really realistic average player development curve where the average player will be ready for the major leagues about 23 or 24 if they're going to ever be that good. They're going to peak in their ability and output somewhere between 28 and 30. And then by about 32, they're going to start declining. And in most cases, by 35, they're out of the league. And so that's a very common case in real life. But there's a lot more outliers, especially when you get to very skilled players, both on the age that they develop as well as the age that they play till. I mean, you can look at someone like Alex Rodriguez, who came in at 18 and then played for 15, 20 years, something like that. And so in order to mimic that and get, I would say, a more realistic picture of the outliers, this won't make everybody develop super early and then play for 20 years, but it will give you a few of those players, which especially in the long-term saves where you want to see somebody like let's say Mookie Betts, you want to see him play into his mid to late 30s and get to 3,000 hits or 500 home runs and get to those milestones, or have pitchers who have a chance of even getting to 200, much less 300 wins. Those sorts of things will be dramatically helped by changing these settings. So within the new version of the game, there's a development target age and aging target age. If you want to make this really simple, I would set to younger for development target age and aging target age of older. However, like I said, this is brand new, so I haven't played around to know if that is still too old or too young or anything. So what I will personally be doing is setting these modifiers where anything less than 1 will slow down the process, and anything greater than 1 will speed up the process. So for batter aging speed, I like to go to 0.75. And for batter development speed, I go for 1.1. So basically a 25% reduction in aging and a 10% increase in development speed. And I do the same for pitchers. You can get a little bit more precise, but these are just good, rough estimates for it. And in addition to that, if you want sort of the diamonds in the rough, the late bloomers, a little bit more randomness with prospects where you get a 20th round draft pick who makes it, to the major leagues, like I'm thinking of Ian Kinsler, who was, I think, like a 30th round shortstop. You get what you'll want to do in order to get that sort of result is update the talent change randomness. So I generally go for about 125 or 130. That to me is a nice balance of players, who maybe they get a little bit worse in an off season or get a little bit better, or sometimes take the dramatic changes. It just adds a little bit more variability to the player ratings. So rather than having that smooth development and aging curve, you get a little bit more randomness, and it mimics real life a little bit more. So highly recommend that. I think this is the biggest gameplay aspect that any of these settings changes make. And then a very small quality of life or a quick quality of life boost, I disable baseball cards because I don't actually use them on the player profile pages, and it just slows down your sim speeds otherwise. So disable that, and then we can go into the AI settings. So this is one where in challenge mode you're a little bit restricted, so being able to make all the changes here I find very valuable. The default settings just frankly are way too easy, even after the last couple years of AI updates. So I really recommend going to, at the very least, about 3/4 of the way on the difficulty, and then going to at least 3/4 of the way on favor prospects. If you want the hardest way, if you want to take the hardest road, amp it up to very hard and highly favor prospects. Personally, I find that can be a little restrictive even, because you generally have to give up, I think, unrealistically too much. If you go much below this, you end up being able to fleece the AI too easily. So really there's about 3 ticks where you can make that change. So if I'm just playing for fun and not trying to maximize the difficulty, I'll usually settle in about 1 tick from the far right on either one. And then that should make the biggest change AI wise. If you go into league settings, you can actually start changing some of the rules. So for me, I used to enable the DH. I know, scandalous. And in this case, I'm going to go back to 1 batter minimum, and turn off the modified extra innings because I'm not fond of those changes. So, and definitely don't allow ties. I will be very upset with you if you do. But you also have a lot of other gameplay options here that you can make those adjustments for. The other one that I think probably next to AI and player development, probably the biggest impact to your game, and definitely one of the things that can ruin a save even more than, players getting old and aging too quickly, is League Evolution. And League Evolution is in concept, a really cool feature. In practice, it is nowhere near as much fun as it sounds. Most people I know just turn it off entirely. I generally, in the last year or two, will leave it on, but I disable pretty much everything else, except for more offense or more pitching, because those are the things where the engine will basically just kind of coast with the modern day league totals. So, if you really want the next 30 years of your save to look exactly like modern day as far as strikeout totals and batting average and home runs, and if you love that, then by all means turn League Evolution off automatic or entirely. Otherwise, the other options just generally don't make things pleasant. Or if there's something you want to do, you're better off just making the change manually rather than hoping that in a few years randomly it'll adjust the active roster size. Because I've seen the extremes where you get really weird expansion, team nickname changes, everything. Like in my last save, I got a team in Jacksonville called the Jacksonville Lugnuts, which would be the most unmarketable team name you can imagine, except I guess like AutoZone as a sponsor. But otherwise, that would get panned, and rightfully so. but the AI just doesn't have any good logic about what is a good team name or what matches. So you'll sometimes get the Las Vegas Timbers or the Portland Blackjacks. Like, all of those things happen. So I turn those off, as well as team relocation. I've seen some weird ones where a team will leave like a multi-million person city and go to a town of 150,000. Once again, the AI just isn't that good at those sorts of things. Active roster size, secondary roster size. Once again, make those changes if you want. Otherwise, you'll get a random reduction in 2 roster spots or something like that, and it will make you miserable. Same with minimum service. It can be too easy or just too hard at some points with it. So just turn those off. And if you leave anything on for League Evolution, make it regarding offense and pitching. And then on here, the last one, just a small aesthetic thing, go with the Silver Slugger and Gold Glove Award, because OOTP can't include that for trademark reasons, I'm sure, but you'll just get really annoyed at seeing the Platinum Stick and Great Glove Awards every offseason if you don't change that. So, like I said, these are the most important ones, the ones that make the biggest impact on your gameplay when starting a new OOTP save. If you want to go into more depth, feel free to ask in the comments for anything, any thoughts and opinions, or leave your own. And in the meantime, happy simming, and look forward to enjoying this year's game.